You want to try to help Kenny and Megan out, or not really?
I think he needs to. I think he needs to, suffer for a while.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Professional Diploma in Photography. Welcome to Module 2, your intermediate module. Did you know that outfitted with a very specially equipped railroad car darkroom provided by Tsar Nicholas II, Sergei Prudkin-Gorsky documented the Russian Empire from 1909 to around 1915. Very relevant because he was an early pioneer of colour photography. Hard to believe this photograph was produced in 1911. Just look how vivid and incredible those colours are. So colour photography has been around for a very, very long time. And that's what this lesson is all about, is how we're going to improve our colour photographs. So you are here with myself, William Eames, your course educator, as always. And as always, the key to success on this course and the key to success with your photography is to keep attending all of the lessons. I do hope that you're seeing a huge amount of progress with your photography already. Still a lot more lessons to go. So as usual, if you want to ask me any questions at all, please just type them into Morpheus there. We try to get back to every question that we can if Morpheus is unable to answer them, but please do rate all of the responses that you get so that we can continually improve Morpheus and improve the quality of those answers. Now, as I said, this lesson is all about colour photography, the importance of colour in our photographs and how we can improve the quality of our colour photography. And this is kind of broken down into, I suppose, three main areas. The first thing that we need to understand is a little bit of physics. It's talking about the colour of light and how our cameras read light and interpret colour. We'll have a look at then at what colour means. So there's lots of meanings attached to colour. I'm sure you're aware of this. If any of you are designers, if any of you are painters, you'll have a good understanding of this subject already. But we're going to have a look at it as photographers should understand colour. And then we'll also have a look at colour theory as well, which is something that we're going to be using much more down the line when we get to editing our photographs. But let's begin by having a look at the colour of light. Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the colour of light? So if light has a colour, what is that colour? Okay, so it's a tricky enough question, okay? But light is basically, appears to us as white. However, it is made up of many different colours combined. And if you're ever familiar with a prism, or if you happen to be a Pink Floyd fan, Dark Side of the Moon, that very famous album cover of the light coming through the prism, light is made up of multiple colours together. When all of these colours come together, they produce white light, and this is what we see. So when we pass light through a prism, it breaks up the colours so that we can see the rainbow. We can see the not the full spectrum of colours, but we can see the colours that make up white light. Now, this is really important to understand as photographers and when it comes to understanding colour. As I mentioned, if you're an artist or if you're a designer, you would have a lot of experience with colour already. But as photographers, we're dealing with light. Light is our medium, and the colours come from that light. It isn't something that comes from pigments. Like if you're a painter, you're going to be working with pigments, and there's slightly different rules. There's different things to understand about this. Let's just break it down further. So as I mentioned, when all the colours come together, they produce white light. Now, the primary colours of light are red, green and blue. Now, very important to understand that they're the primary colours of light. The primary colours in pigment are red, yellow and blue. So if you've done, say, Phil's Illustrator course, or if you've done the graphic design course, when we talk a little bit about colour theory on those lessons, the primary colours there are a little bit different. But when we're talking about light, the three colours are red, green and blue. In the spaces where they overlap, they produce all the other colours, but when we combine them all together, they produce white light. So adding all these colours together will produce white light. The overlap of these primary colours is what produces the secondary colours, which you can see here, which are the cyan, magenta and yellow. And photographers work with RGB produced files. So if you've ever wondered what RGB stands for, it's red, green and blue. And this is an additive colour space. In other words, we add the colours together to produce other colours. This differs from other colour models which you may be familiar with, CMYK, which is one that a lot of designers, a lot of artists would be familiar with. That's a subtractive colour space. In other words, you take away colours to produce the colours. But we are working with additive colours. We add colours together to produce other colours because we work with light. So we have our primary colours, which are red, green and blue. Our secondary colours are produced in the spaces where they overlap, and then when we add all of these together, we get white light. Now, here's a question for you. How do you get black? Okay, so how would you get black in this particular instance if we add all the colours together to get white? To produce black, we simply take away all of the colours. Black is actually the absence of any colour. Okay, so we consider it a colour, but what black actually is the absence of any colour. So removing all of these will produce black. Now, so how does this information then relate to how our camera sensors see the world? So we see in RGB, essentially, and our cameras see in RGB as well. So camera sensors, much like a lot of technology surrounding photography, is based on the human eye. Okay, so the human eye, very, very complex, very interesting, incredible, organ really, and is something that photography has basically been emulating since its inception, since its invention. And our camera sensors work in a very similar way. So we see light; it enters our eyes, and it's broken down. By the receptors, by the rods in the back of our eyes, and very similarly to how our camera sensors see colour, it's basically through red, green and blue, and this produces our colour photographs. So the light enters our lens, it's recorded onto our image sensor, and it picks up the red, green and blue, and it would produce the colours based on red, green and blue, the overlap of those colours and the different intensities those colours are coming in, the different brightnesses that those colours are coming in through the lens. Now, you'll often see as well with cameras, they talk about their image processor. Like, for example, in Canon, it's the Digic processors. And if you've ever wondered what that is the camera's brain. It's how it interprets the information that's coming into the camera, primarily colour, and produces accurate colours. And this is why different cameras produce different colours, different colour variations. It's because they all essentially have slightly different brains that see colours slightly differently. Let's break this down a little bit more so we understand it a little bit more clearly. Here is our camera's sensor. Okay, now to be more specific, the grey part is actually our camera's sensor. So we can see each of these individual squares. These are the different pixels that are in the camera, which will vary depending on the model that you're using as to how many that you have. But our camera sensor actually sees in black and white. Okay, it doesn't actually see colour, it just sees everything in grayscale to be more accurate. Different varying shades of grey, all the way from black through to white. How it sees colour is that on top of it lays what's called the Bayer filter. And the Bayer filter contains alternating rows of red, green and green, blue filters. as you can see here very clearly in this image. And this sits above the camera's sensor, and this is what will produce our different colors. Now, just a quick note on this, you'll see that there's twice as many green as red or blue sensors. So each primary color does not receive an equal fraction of the total area, because the human eye is more sensitive to green light than both red and blue light. And this is a color filter array that's bonded to the sensor. So it sits on top of the sensor, is actually bonded to it, and allows color to be recorded. So just on that point, if you're familiar, a phrase kind of associated with Ireland is, you know, the 40 shades of green. And that's because as humans we can actually differentiate more variations of the colour green than any other colour. It's just a nice little interesting fact. But let's see how this Bayer filter actually works. So we have our red pixels, and we have our light that, as we now know, is made up primarily of red, green and blue. And as those red, green and blue hit the sensor, the red will allow the red to pass through and hit the image sensor, but it will not allow the green and the blue to pass through. And this will produce the colour red. Similarly then with our green, so again the light passes through, but the Bayer filter will only allow green to reach the image sensor. And then finally with our blue, it'll allow blue to pass through to be recorded on the image sensor. And this is how we can produce our colours. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that's just 3 colours, so how do we get all of the other colours? Well, this is where our camera's brain comes into play again, okay? So the sensor on its own can only measure the number of light photons it collects, or the light that's passing through it. It has no way of determining the colour of these photons, or determining the colour of the light. And as such, the sensor only records in monochrome, as we have mentioned there. So the Bayer filter will filter out the light, as we can see here in the diagram. It acts as a screen, only allowing light photons of a certain colour into each pixel on the sensor, which produces our colours, our red, green or blue, whichever one it is that it's filtering out. So how is a full colour image created then, if each pixel can only record a single colour of light? Okay, so it's surely missing much more of the information needed to make a full colour image. But due to some very clever algorithms within the camera, in the camera's processor, it succeeds in working out the full colour image for each pixel, and this is called demosaicing. So demosaicing, now it's a very complex system, it's a very complex thing to get into, so I won't really get into it. But in simple terms, the camera treats each 2x2 set of pixels as a single unit. So if you think about our 2x2 pixels here, so 2x2, so in other words we take 4. If you take 4 of each of these at a time, you'll see you'll always have 2 green and 1 blue and 1 red. Okay, and from this it can then estimate the actual colour based on the photon levels for each of these 4 pixels. And that's a kind of a very simplified version of how our cameras record light and how they create colour. So what happens then is that all of this information is interpreted into what's called colour space. Colour space. And again, if you're a designer and you work a lot with Illustrator, or you've done a lot of work in InDesign and other Adobe programs or any programs, you'd be very familiar with colour space. But basically, to simplify it, colour space is a specific range of colours that can be represented in a given photo. There's varying sizes of colour spaces. There's big colour spaces, and then there's ones that are smaller. The most common one that we would be familiar with as photographers is sRGB. It's a standard. Now, as you can see here in the diagram, sRGB is actually much smaller compared to Adobe RGB and Pro Photo RGB. The kind of horseshoe shape is our own range of vision when it comes to colour. Actually, as you see, Pro Photo is larger in some areas when it comes that it produces colours that our eyes can't even really distinguish. If you're wondering about the awkward looking shape as well, the one that's not quite a triangle, that's CMYK. That's CMYK. So it's a bit of a different kind of shape. But sRGB and Adobe RGB would be the two that we're most familiar with. Now, you're probably thinking, why is sRGB the standard if Adobe RGB is bigger and produces more colors? And it's because our screens are generally all sRGB. So if you're ever wondering why there's a difference if you take a photograph and it sometimes you display it on your monitor, or perhaps you look at it on your phone and the colors are completely different, it might be that the color space is not correctly set. So you will find in your camera settings an option for color space, and I recommend that you stick with sRGB for the moment. Now, if you're photographing in RAW, which we will be having a look at in later lessons, but if you're already photographing in RAW, no color space is assigned. It'll actually capture in the largest color space, which is Pro Photo RGB, and you can actually assign a color space afterwards. But if you're photographing in JPEG, when you choose the color space, that's the color space that's going to be assigned to the file. And generally, JPEGs will be associated with sRGB. So don't worry too much about it for the moment. We will be revisiting this and having a look at it in much greater detail when we get on to our editing in the later modules, but it's just something that you should be aware of now. With this in mind, then, one of the biggest frustrations, an area of frustration for photographers, is making sure that our colours are correct from the time that we take a photograph to looking at them on screen to when they're printing. And this is called colour management. But a question that I get asked very, very frequently is how to calibrate a monitor, how to ensure that our monitors are producing accurate colours. So I'll have a look at a couple of tips then that we can use to guide our calibration. So the first thing, for any type of monitor, before calibrating, is to first of all clean it. It might sound straightforward, but simply clean your monitor. I find lens cloths are actually very good at cleaning the monitor. You can get those specialized sprays that you can use as well. That'll make a big difference. You also should be editing, if you're whether you're using a laptop or whether you're using a monitor, you should be trying to work in neutral lighting if possible. So, I mean, if you're really into your photographic editing, it might be worth investing in neutral lights as a specific area for you to sit down to edit your photographs. You want to turn on your monitor for about 30 minutes before calibration because it needs to heat up, and then you'll get much more accurate representation of the colours on the screen. And then if you've previously calibrated your monitor, so if you've tampered around with it trying to get the calibration correct, it may be worth resetting it and just starting over, so you're essentially starting from zero. Now, to calibrate your monitors, unfortunately, between Windows and Mac, as you can see, there's quite a bit of work involved, particularly with Windows. So one of the advantages there in Mac, really, it's a much more straightforward process. But this will be in the notes. It's obviously too much information really to kind of go through in terms of the lesson and time. So you'll find in the summary notes that you can take it step by step in your own time. It's very straightforward to do it, but you will definitely need to take a little bit of time to do it. However, if you really want consistent results, it may be worth investing in a colorimeter. And as you can see here, a colorimeter, as you may be familiar with them, it's designed to calibrate the monitor for you. Okay, so they attach to your screen, they attach to any screen. They usually have their own software included that you'll need to upload onto your computer. And you simply attach the device to the screen like this, and it will calibrate everything for you. And again, there's a step-by-step guide there if you are thinking about buying one. They do cost about you're looking at about 100 to maybe up to €200 depending on the type that you get. More advanced ones will measure the light in the room as well. So if you don't have an area of neutral lighting, they will actually take into consideration the light that's available in the room too. Now, I would recommend that if you are using one of these, that you calibrate your monitor at least once a month, because they do change. Switching them on and off, switching on and off laptops, etc., that will change the the colours that appear on screen. So it's worth doing around once a month. But that'll be in the toolkits for you, so you can check them out and take your time on calibrating your monitors. So moving away from all of that kind of technical stuff, I know there was quite a little bit of jargon involved there, a little bit of physics. It is important to understand, and the main thing that you need to take away from that is that we work light. We're not working with pigments, so we have slightly different things that we need to consider as photographers when it comes to color. But how can we use then colour in our own photography to communicate and to express a point of view, or to create a mood and an atmosphere in the photograph? So there's lots of different meanings attached to different colours. There's lots of positive meanings, there's lots of negative ones as well. So we're going to run through a few of these just to give you a kind of an overview, and maybe to give you some ideas and inspiration when you're taking your photograph about how you may use colour in the next shot that you take. So let's begin and have a look at, should be pretty obvious, the colour green. Okay, so what do you think about when you see the colour green? What comes to mind when you see images that have the colour green? Well, the first thing that we probably associate with the colour green is health. We think about positive things with the colour green: health, we think about growth, we think about vitality, we also think about the environment, we think about the earth, we think about things like this, like the forests, we think about life when we think about the colour green, we think about fertility, but it also has negative associations like jealousy, like green with envy. That's one that we'd be familiar with. Some of us may be familiar with it. Also, we refer to people who are inexperienced as green. So there's a lot of different things that we can associate with the colour green. Generally, most of them are going to be quite positive, but think about this, think about even just in design terms. Health clubs, fitness clubs and so on generally would use the colour green. Other colours like yellow and orange we'll be speaking about a little bit as well. They're kind of energetic colours. But growth and health and positive things generally associated with the colour green. The colour blue, so lovely photograph here, nice deep blues here, quite a moody shot as well. The colour blue, again, we'd consider it's quite a harmonious colour. Okay, so again, there, unity, a colour, it's a colour associated with coming together. And think about, even if you think about flags in general, the colours that are used, they have a lot of meaning behind them. It's also quite cold, so if you want to communicate something cold, that's neither a positive nor a negative thing. Having coldness in an image. We may want to present, a slightly colder photograph. It's something that I like to do with my own shots. I quite like putting a little bit of a coldness in the shots. It's quite futuristic as well. That coldness can be associated with future, with technology. So there's that kind of association with it too. Okay, and then it's also associated with depression. So again, if you think about turns of phrase that are used when it comes to colour, like, oh, I'm feeling blue. You're talking about feeling down. You're talking about feeling a little bit depressed. So, think about all of these associations with colour when you're using them in your photographs. There's a lot that can be taken away from them. And I mean, it's something that's communicated almost instantly and perhaps subconsciously as well. Moving on, red, a very diverse colour that we can use in our photography. And as you can see with this photograph here, these luxurious red seats. So red is a colour that's associated with luxury, but there's a lot of meanings with red. So perhaps one of the most common one is danger. Red is danger. You think about Star Trek, watching a lot of Star Trek. Red alert, so there's red alerts. Okay, so danger is one association that we have with red, and it's a universal association. So anywhere you are in the world, if you see red, it means danger. It's also a colour of passion. Red is heavily associated with passion, with love, with romance, as I mentioned there. And it's also a colour of anger. You're seeing red. So again, think about these kinds of phrases. You see red, we get angry. And it is a violent colour. You know, it is a colour of violence as well. You know, so again, this is kind of associating it with danger. But it's also a colour of luck. So, I mean, you think about, like, for example, a lot of football teams wear the colour red, and it's a colour of luck. Certainly, I know in China, it's strongly associated with luck, which is, there's a lot of red. If you ever visit China, you know, that's the reason there's so much red, is that it is a lucky colour. And of course, it's warmth, heat comes from red as well. So if you're trying to give a little bit more warmness to your photographs, you may not want to go with intense reds, but just give it a slight red hue to it to add a little bit of warmth to your shots. We've got orange as well. Not as many meanings associated with orange as some of the other colours that we'll have a look at, but one of the big ones is energy. So orange is a colour that's associated with stimulating the mind, is associated with producing energy. So again, it's a colour that you'd see used frequently in areas of high activity. It's also a very warm colour, as we can see here in this photograph. If you think about sunrises, sunsets, it gives that nice warm glow. It's a colour associated with vitality, and I think it's also a colour associated with transience. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean about transitioning, about moving from one thing to the next. And again, if you think about sunrises and sunsets, we're moving from a period of the day ending or the day beginning, you know, into something else, into nighttime or into the day itself. So I have this association of transience when it comes to the colour orange, and it's also a fun colour as well. It's a colour, like, again, you've got that kind of idea of energy, so it's a colour that is used for fun. So I think, for example, just to give you an idea, if you're photographing children, you might incorporate a little bit of orange into the photograph. Then we've got the colour pink. Now, we won't be able to go through every single colour, but these are ones that I do think that you should be thinking about. Pink is has a pacifying effect, actually. Pink is a colour that's used, you know, it can, in short, psychological terms, if it's used in kind of short doses, it can have a pacifying effect. But it's a playful colour. You know, so pink is a very, very playful colour. It's a friendly colour. It is a colour that's associated with friendship. For example, pink roses would be generally given amongst friends. You know, so there's a lot of meaning behind the colour of roses as well. Worth checking out too. It's a colour associated with innocence. It's a hopeful colour as well. So a lot of positive things associated with it. But innocence can also be interpreted as naivety. It does have these associations that, you know, for children, for example, would be dressed in pink. Now, maybe something that doesn't happen so frequently anymore, as we kind of change associations of colour and gender, which is also something very important to be aware of, is that, I mean, when I brought up the colour pink, many of you may have thought straight away it's a girl's colour, but I think that's something that we need to remove from a colour association, is what genders they're associated with. And in fact, I mean, the colours blue and pink, obviously blue for a boy, pink for a girl, was what we would know in the modern era. It was actually the opposite. In Victorian times, it was pink for a boy and it was blue for a girl. So, you know, I think that associations of colour and gender are something that are constantly changing. And then we have purple. Okay, so purple, again, not a huge amount that we can, I suppose, interpret from purple, but it is a colour of royalty. And actually, just an interesting one with the colour purple. The word purple itself is quite a new word compared to the other colours. So if you're familiar with that old nursery, or not really a nursery rhyme, but that old rhyme, roses are red, violets are blue. Well, violets aren't blue, violets are purple. Purple wasn't a word, so anything purple in the past was called blue. which again which would be why it has this association with royalty. You hear the word royal blue, but they could actually be referring to purple. So you've got this kind of regal quality to the colour purple. It's associated with nobility as well. There is also mystery involved with purple, wisdom too, and spirituality. These are all things that are connected to the colour purple. There's just a couple of more of these just to have a very quick look at. So the colour yellow. Yellow, probably the first thing that may have come to your mind, is associated with joy. It's associated with happiness. Again, it's a very playful colour. It's an optimistic colour, and certainly has strong associations with summer. But yellow also has some negative associations as well. It would be a warning. Yellow is generally used as a warning colour before going into danger, and it is also associated with disease. It's associated with sickness as well. But generally, you've got very good associations with the colour yellow. And then we're moving on to our final two colours now, and there's a couple of that we have left out, but we'll finish up with black and then white. And black is as I mentioned earlier, it's actually the absence of colour, but we do view it as a colour, and it is an important colour, but it has an association with sophistication. Black is a sophisticated colour. It's an intense colour. It's a very formal colour as well, and it's quite a mysterious colour. I mean, if you think about anybody who wears black, you think about people who wear black in movies, they can be quite intense, they can be mysterious, they can also be evil. So there's that association with it too. But it is also a colour of grief. Not everywhere. Certainly, in Ireland and I believe throughout Europe, it is the colour of grief. But as you travel the world, that colour associated with grief does change. But it is also associated with death. So there is quite heavy meanings to the colour black. And then we have the opposite. We have the colour white. Okay, so the colour white is, but it is kind of the opposite. We've got reverence and cleanliness associated with the colour white. So you think about, clinics, you think about hospitals, everything is white. You've got that kind of association with it. It is a peaceful colour as well. Nice and peaceful shot here. It's also associated with youth, and it is certainly associated with winter. So obviously you think about this photograph here, these snow-covered plains, and it is a colour associated with marriage, but it can also be a very sterile colour, as I mentioned, with things like cleanliness, with things like hospitals and so on. Sterile environments, white is associated with them. So there's obviously a few colours there that I have left out, grey and brown. Just simply don't have the time to go into them, but do check them out. Lots of different places online that you can check out colour meanings, and there's some slight variations. These are just general meanings. You may have some slightly different associations with colour depending on where you're from. So that is also something very important to understand, that depending on where we grew up, that there is different associations with these different colours, and you want to incorporate that into your photography. Now, just to finish off the lesson, something that would be much more associated with designers is colour theory, but it is still a very useful thing for photographers to understand. And especially when we get to a later stage where we start editing our photographs, we're going to be using a lot of the terms, and we'll be thinking about how our colours work together to create photographs. So we're going to talk a little bit about colour theory here. So first of all, what is colour theory? Okay, well, colour theory simply, it relates to all visual arts, and that includes photography, and it's a guideline about how colours work together that create photographs that create images that are harmonious and are pleasing to look at, and that do have a meaning behind them as well. Let's have a look at a colour wheel. So here we've got an RGB colour wheel. There are different types of colour wheels, but as I mentioned earlier, we work with RGB, and you can tell it's RGB because we have white in the centre. We have all these colours adding up together to produce white in the centre. Now, Colors have relationships. There's color harmony. So certain colors will work together and certain colors won't work together. This is when we say colors clash. But let's have a look at some of these different harmonies. So when we take a color wheel, we can actually use shapes within the color wheel to see what colors work together. And the first shape to have a look at is a triadic shape, which is a triangle. And at each of these 3 points, we would have a color. And the idea is that these 3 colors will work together. So here I've just created a triangle, a triadic color wheel here with the primary colors. So red, green and blue, and they are going to work together. Very strong, vibrant colors, but they will work together. They can be quite intense. Then we have more straightforward ones like complementary. This is very, very straightforward. These are simply opposites, colors that work together like green and yellow. Sorry, blue and yellow here in this particular one. Okay, so they're at the opposite ends here, but they are 2 colors that will work together. So you can do this at any point on the color wheel once they're at opposite ends. So for example, you could go red and green. You could go magenta to the kind of, I suppose, kind of green there again. So you can have a lot of fun with this, with choosing colours. And certainly when we get to a stage where we're split toning our photographs, which is basically using 2 different colours to tone our shots, complementary colours would be something that we would be using a lot. Then we have analogous, and analogous colours are 3 colours that are side by side on the colour wheel. So if you think about, say, autumnal type of images, autumnal photographs, where we have very kind of strong reds, yellows and oranges, these are analogous colours, as you can see here on the colour wheel. They're simply any 3 colours or more that are side by side. So just 2 more to have a look at. So next one are tetradic, and this is 4 colours. So it's a rectangular shape and it produces 4 colours that will work together. You can also use a square shape here as well to get slightly different variations. And then finally we have split complementary, which is again a kind of a triangular type of shape, but going from opposite ends. So here we've got a red and we have our cyan and our green, which will all work together. So these are all things we're going to be revisiting when we come to editing our photographs, but it's a good idea to get familiar with them now. And I mean, to really give yourself a challenge, you could try and find these out in your environment, to try and find some of these kind of complementary colours you know, out there in the world. But especially if you're making photographs, so for example, if you are a food photographer or you're working in a studio, you really want to know how these colours work together so that you can produce more dynamic images. Just a couple of things to finish off then with colour theory, just to talk about colour itself and how we can change the variations of a single colour. So when we choose a colour, we're talking about hue. So we choose the colour red, but what we're really saying here is the hue red, and this is pure colour, and it's the colour as it appears on the spectrum. Colour is actually more of a general term referring to all colours, but hue refers to a dominant colour family. So if I take the hue red, I can modify that red by adding white, black or grey. So if I want to tint a colour, I add white to it. And again, if you're a painter, you'd be very familiar with this. But if I want to lighten up the colour red, I'm adding a tint to it by adding white. If I want to add shade, we do this by adding black to a colour. Okay, so shades are created by adding black to a colour, but the one that's most important for us to understand are tones. Okay, so tints and shades are something that's used much more in painting and design. We can do this when we're editing our photographs as well, but tones are created by adding grey to a colour. And in photography, identifying tones in colour is key to better exposures, which we're going to be looking at much later on. Now, we'll also be looking at tones a lot more in the next lesson when we're talking purely black and white, but it's identifying the amount of grey that's in a colour. Okay, now one that you might not be familiar with is that monochrome is not just black and white. So quite often there's a lot of terms associated with black and white. You've got monochrome, you've got grayscale, and you've just got the term black and white as well. But monochrome is when we use any hue with different variations. So we had a look there at the color red, and we saw the variations of the color red by adding white, by adding black, or adding grey. If we were to produce a photograph with all of those different variations of red, that is still considered a monochrome image. It's when we have one color scheme with varying tones, shades, and tints in the photograph. It's not exclusively a black and white photograph, although it is heavily associated with that. It can be any color. So you could have a blue monochromatic photograph. You can have a yellow monochromatic photograph, like in this photograph. You can have a red monochromatic photograph, and so on. It is a term that is used when we have one color that's dominant in the photograph. And finally then, one thing that we really need to understand is how much colour can influence a mood in a photograph. So here we have a nice autumnal forest scene. Okay, it's quite inviting, it's quite warm. We've got that nice ray of light coming through the photograph, and you know, it looks like a very pleasant place. When we learn about colour and how to change colour in our photographs, and this is something you can do within the camera, a lot of custom settings that you can apply through the different effects options in your camera, you can change the mood of a photograph dramatically. So here we've got the same scene, but I have reduced the saturation. I have changed some of the colours in the shadows to a more kind of blue colour, and I've reduced the oranges and the reds quite dramatically to give a little bit more of a solemn, almost spooky type of effect to the photograph. So colour has a huge impact on the mood of the shot. And when we talk about colour, it isn't just a case of the colours that you use, it's also the intensity of the colours that you use. So I've desaturated this photograph, I've reduced the amount of colour in the photograph to the point where it's leaning more towards almost being a kind of like a black and white photograph, reducing saturation and changing some of those colours, changing the intensities of those colours can really change the mood within a scene. So that is the end of this lesson. A lot of information there to take in. And coming up in the next lesson, I suppose we're going to be kind of continuing along this theme. We're going to be having a look at black and white photography. So by understanding colour, we can actually produce better black and white photographs, as we're going to see in the next lesson. So we're going to kick things off by having a look at colour versus black and white, when to use and not to use black and white. We'll have a look at what you should be looking out for. So there are a lot of elements to successful black and white photographs. We'll explore all of these in the lesson. And then there's some areas, genres of photography that I think are just made for black and white photography. And we'll have a look at some of those different types of photography. So a lesson challenge for you, a little bit of a tougher challenge. So I mentioned a little bit earlier in the lesson, not so long ago, about monochrome photographs. And monochrome is not just a black and white picture, that it is a photograph that is using a dominant colour of varying tones. And I would like you to post a monochrome colour photo. It's a tougher challenge. You may have to make something for yourselves, but if you can get out there and you can find something that is monochrome in your local environment, that would be impressive as well. So post a monochrome photograph. So that is the end of this lesson. I do hope that you enjoyed it. The takeaways from this lesson is to think about the colours that are in your shots, because they will influence what the viewer takes away from the shot, the meaning that behind the photograph. Also do understand that colour theory is something that is used very frequently in design. It's used less frequently in photography, but we will be using it when it comes to editing our photographs. And this is when we're going to be able to really put our own style onto our shots when we start exploring camera raw, and how we can really enhance a photograph to take it to another level. So I do hope that you enjoyed that lesson, and I'll see you all back here again very, very soon for our lesson on black and white photography. So until then, bye-bye. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Professional Diploma in Photography. Welcome to Module 2, your intermediate module. Did you know that outfitted with a very specially equipped railroad car darkroom provided by Tsar Nicholas II, Sergei Prudkin-Gorsky documented the Russian Empire from 1909 to around 1915. Very relevant because he